Hi, everybody. My name is Garrett. I am here with Marco, Alexis, Will, and Damien, and we are very excited to present to you a gameplay experience of the calamitous and chaotic Nanjing Decade of China called Empire's Ashes. Next slide. We want to first set the stage historically because this is a historical game that we are presenting to you tonight. And the stage, as you can see, is civil war in China. China in 1931 is in extremely dire straits. Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek of the Chinese Nationalist Party, KMT, GMD, did successfully end warlord rule in the Northern Expedition, but as we know, this warlord rule continued in a version of soft warlordism, this loose network of alliances that left Chiang's Nationalist Republic of China barely held together. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party, bounding between bases, Jinggangshan and Jiangxi, are waging civil war against the Nationalist Party for control of China. Next slide. And in the north, the Imperial Japanese Army is looking down on China, not only geographically, but also ideologically, as seeing themselves, the Yamato, as the superior race to the Chinese. And in 1931, in September, the Imperial Japanese Army set off explosives in the city of Mukden, engineering circumstances for the Japanese invasion of the provinces of Manchuria, which they promptly renamed Manchukuo. In 1931, from Manchukuo, the Japanese army is launching skirmishes into northern China. Total war is on the horizon, war that will eventually brew into the Second Sino-Japanese War. So in this year, 1931, in China, all of these interests and actors, the KMT, the CCP, the diverse warlords, and the Japanese Empire all struggle for the future of the Chinese state. Next slide. So the intention of our game is to give you an experience and perspective of this period of Chinese history, not through observation, as we are used to in our classes at WashU, but through gameplay. And through the mechanics that we've devised, we want to facilitate your understanding of the chaos of this decade in China, simulating through our mechanics how China threatened to fall apart, and simulating from a perspective of standing in the shoes of these diverse historical leaders that fought for very diverse reasons in the same territory and at the same time. Next slide. So overall, we want you to take away an understanding of how only 90 years ago, the nation of China, which is now a global superpower, was fractured and came close to total collapse. Next slide. So our game has a diverse set of inspirations. We take inspirations from the wonderful Settlers of Catan in our development mechanics, because at this time, all of these nations and interests in China were trying to develop their territories. However, these nations and interests were also in conflict, and we take inspiration from the mechanics of Risk, very popular and excellent warfare simulation game. And here, our group are very big fans of the popular computer game Civilization, and we take inspiration from their asymmetrical, faction-centric historical gameplay. So through these inspirations, we have created for your eyes today a glimpse into a project that will hopefully give you some perspective, some direct perspective on how China developed, had warfare, and conflicted ideologically in 1931. Next slide. So before we get into the meat of our presentation, I want to have a brief disclaimer on how our game is currently in what you might call a pre-alpha stage of development. You, our wonderful investors, are encouraged to consider our product, but playtesting is slated for the next quarter. So we'd like to report that our ideas and mechanics are solidified, and we're very proud of the work we've done. But we are working on clearly organizing and communicating our mechanics in a way that is best understandable to you, the players. So expect some roughness around the edges, expect some roughness around our organization of our concepts, and we want your good constructive feedback so we can make this a fulfilling gameplay experience for everybody. Next slide. The leaders that you will control in this game and their organizations are as follows. And these should all be hopefully familiar to you, to us. We have General Chiang Kai-shek, Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, of the Chinese Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party. He was a nationalist, but also a fascist, as we've discussed in class, an intense urbanizer, friendly with the opium industry and with the West, and heavily militarized via Northern Expedition experience and the experience of military academies. We also have Mao Zedong, who we've spent many, many weeks learning about, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. When we say leader, this is our leader for the purpose of this game. He is a communist whose ideology, of course, centers on adherence to the mass line, with the peasantry being the main body of revolution. Mao Zedong is thus the voice of the peasantry in China in the rural areas. He's a guerrilla fighter and a revolutionary. Furthermore, we have, very interestingly, one of the northern warlords in China, General Shang Xuelang, who was technically allied to the KMT, but ruled his territories independently with an iron fist. His father was killed by the Japanese, and thus he harbors an intense disdain for them north in Manchukuo, and his rule in his territories in the northeast can be characterized as soft warlordism. And finally, we have General Shigeru Honjo of the Imperial Japanese Army, who specifically led the Kwangtung Army in the north. He was responsible for assisting to orchestrate the Mukden incident, which led to the invasion and takeover of Chinese Manchuria. He acts independently from the Japanese emperor, and he is extremely interested in the resource-rich territories of China and in Japan becoming a powerful world-caliber imperialist empire. Next slide. All right.
So for this part, I'm going to explain the monetary development systems in our game. Next slide. So at the start of the game, each player will have a dice roll to see who goes first, and each player will choose a fraction. And so at the beginning of the game, each player will receive 2 provinces with a road, a village, and 2 military units per province. And they will also receive 5 taels, and all currency is measured in Chinese silver tael. Next slide. So during the first phase, which when the fractions will be developing, each road would cost 2 tael, each village will cost 2 tael as well, and each village will also yield a tax yield of 1 tael per turn. Towns will cost 5 tael, and they will also yield 4 taels per turn in taxes, and cities will also cost 10 tael with and also yield 4 taels per taxes. Next slide. So during the second phase of our game, the cost of the military. So the standard unit for our military is going to be it's going to cost 2 taels. And the next level will be a regiment. But in order for each player to develop a regiment, they must buy 3 standard units. So in other words, they would have to spend 6 tael to make 1 regiment. And then also to develop an army, they would require 5 standard units. So that means they would have to pay 10 tael in order to make an army. And also for every 10 standard units, they must also pay 2 tael per turn to the bank.
So I'm going to be introducing the setup and structure of our game at the start. So here's our game board. You can see that each faction starts in a different location. So the 4 factions are Japan, which is in white. They begin in Korea and Taiwan. The Northeastern Army is purple. They begin in Hebei and Liaoning. The KMT is blue. They start in Jiangsu and Anhui. And the CCP is obviously red. They start in Jiangxi and Fujian. Then we also have 5 independent warlords. These provinces can be conquered for lucrative rewards. They are the yellow provinces, and they are the Shanxi clique, which is in Shanxi. That's right next to Hebei. There is the Ma clique, which is in Gansu, which is the long one in the middle. We have the Sichuan clique, which is in Sichuan right below that. The Yunnan clique, which is again below that. And then the Guangxi clique, which is located down in the south in the middle. So in order to increase the asymmetrical gameplay and the unique feeling of playing each faction, we have different leader bonuses for each faction. So Japan's bonus is Imperial Domination, which means that all offensive battles that they take, they will get +1 to their top dice roll to increase their military effectiveness. The Northeastern Army, due to the ruthless leadership of Zhang Zhuilang, each town will yield 1 extra tael in tax revenue. The KMT's industrial capacity allows them to develop faster, and their towns and cities will cost 1 less tael to build. And then Mao Zedong's theory of protracted war makes them a very fast guerrilla fighting unit, and their roads will only cost 1 tael to build. So our game is split into 2 phases. The first will last 8 turns. This is the development phase. And the basic turn structure is first you will collect taxes on all of the assets you have developed. You will then move your troops within your developed territories. However, you can only travel through provinces where you have built roads in them. The third part of your turn, you will be able to build developments. And then finally, you can move your military units outward into provinces bordering your developed territories. Then after those first 8 turns, the conquest phase will begin. It's very similar to the development phase. You can continue to develop your territory's capacity, but you can now also battle through attacking provinces that are bordering your own, and you can do that as many times as you want or until you have exhausted all of your resources. And then the win conditions for the game, we have 2 game modes currently. The first is domination, very simple, take over every province to win the game. And then there's also sovereignty, in which you have to take over all of the faction capitals of your enemies to conquer China.
Okay, so I will be talking about the military and battle systems of our game. So at the beginning of the game, during the initial development phase, there will be no player versus player battling. And this is, again, to split the game into 2 major sections and to incentivize some aspect of development. Players during this beginning development phase may only expand into neutral provinces and those controlled by any of the 5 neutral warlord regions. And you may only attack provinces that are adjacent to you at the start of the turn. You can't do unlimited battling. And so you can place your allotted number of troops in any combination in your provinces as long as each has at least 1. Neutral provinces have 1 to 2 troops, and neutral warlord provinces have 3 to 5 troops, depending on the strength of the warlord. So our military system is that there is only 1 standard troop used by all the players, which can again be bought using silver taels. 1 troop represents a company, 3 troops can combine to form a regiment, and 5 troops are combined to form an army. Each level of 1, 3, or 5 is represented by a different looking army piece in the game. For every 10 units you own, you must pay 2 taels to the bank as a taxation system to prevent kind of people going too far and basically just destroying everyone when they get ahead. So the rules of combat are determined by dice rolls, and these dice rolls determine the number of troops participating in a battle as well as the results of the battles. So attackers have can have up to 3 dice, with 3 dice being the max, and defenders can have up to 2 dice, but they have tie odds. The number of dice correspond with the number of troops a given province has stationed there, and you can't roll more dice than you have number of troops in a given province. And during this combat phase of the game, there are no limits on the number of battles per turn,
And so essentially you can battle as many times as you want with neighboring territories until you decide to stop or cannot battle anymore. There are bonuses for capturing multiple territories in one turn, with some ideas being that you're given a fort, which gives bonus on dice rolls. Military units may only move through provinces with roads unless you are attacking another player. Essentially, military units moving within a player's territory may only move via roads. However, this restriction does not apply to when you are attacking neutral territories or another player. And troop movement can only occur at the start of one's turn. You can't move troops within your territory once you've already attacked another province. So with conquered territories, you're given, once you take over a province, you have two major choices with what to do with it. You can raise the province, which destroys all developments, and you loot one half of the cost of building the developments in that province. And you have to round down if the number of the cost of the developments is odd. The other option is to annex, which means that you have to pay the cost of all the developments in the province. However, you get to keep, of course, all the developments. The only caveat is with warlord provinces that they are unique. You can annex with all development at no cost to the player to incentivize their takeover as special provinces within the game.
Okay, so event and faction cards. So there are two types of cards in the game, event cards and faction cards. So event cards are general and they apply to every player who draws them. And event cards are drawn each turn of the combat phase, but only one player will draw one event card for each turn. And these are staggered, so the 4 faction players will draw them every different turn. And each card can give a positive or negative modifier. Some of the cards actually give you options to choose between what you would like to do, according to whatever strategy is better for your player. Faction cards, there are 4 for each faction, and you actually draw them every 6 turns, and all the players are drawing on the same 6 turns. Again, only at the start of the combat phase. And these are selected randomly, even though they are based on historical events. The reason we chose to do this is because we wanted some variety in the game. We didn't want you to just be reenacting what happened in history. But each card does provide you with an explanation of what the event card, the faction card, is based on. So you get a little bit of the history out of it too. And in each is curtailed to the specific events associated with that faction. So you can go to the next slide. All right, so this is one example of an event card. We're going to go show you 2. So this is old debts. A Western banker walks into your office. Those are some nice troops you got there, General. It'd be a shame if they were to catch fire. You know he means business. And you lose 3 tails. Essentially, you're paying a Western banker some old loan that either one of your predecessors ended up promising them, or maybe that you promised yourself. But you'll lose 3 tails for this. Again, this is an example of a negative event card. The next one is just say no or yes. Opium smoking is bad for the troops, but selling opium could provide you with badly needed revenue. Either A, sell it, gain 3 silver tiles, and lose 1 unit from opium addiction, or ban it, gain 1 unit, lose 3 silver tiles. And again, you can choose to do this, whatever you think is better. Okay, so these are the faction cards, and I'm going to show you an example from each faction. The Jiangxi Soviet is one of the faction cards to the communists. And again, here's a little bit of a history. The Jiangxi Soviet lasted from 1928 to 1934. And during that time, Mao was nominally in charge, but he did work with other members of the CCP. They experimented in some kind of communist policies, including land redistribution and also guerrilla warfare. And for a long time, they were really successful. Eventually, they ended up trying to switch towards more conventional tactics. And that is when the KMT ended up overrunning them in Jiangxi, and that led to the Long March, which pretty much marked the next stage in the Chinese Civil War between the communists and the nationalists. But for the Jiangxi Soviet, you get the CCP gets +3 to all dice rolls when fighting in Jiangxi or Fujian provinces. The Jiangxi Soviet was pretty much on the border between Jiangxi and Fujian. So you can go to the next one. So the New Life Movement, this is an event card, faction card for the KMT. So essentially, it's explained that the New Life movement was a unique kind of set of moral beliefs that Chiang Kai-shek partly formulated, combining different philosophies, including Christianity, Confucianism, and also elements of fascism. Basically, his ideas were to create an orderly social body and a martial social body that he thought conformed with the norms that he thought the Chinese society would be better at. Um, and that would also help them obey him and also defeat his enemies, including the communists. So this one is temporary, but it gives you +1 to dice rolls when you're fighting against the CCP for the next 5 turns. Again, the idea behind this is a morale bonus from the New Life movement and Chiang Kai-shek inspiring it. And of course, the next 5 turns, then you have another faction card that you're drawing. You can go to the next one. Okay, so the Jian incident, this is for the Northeast Army in Zheng Zuilang. So we give you a little bit of history. Again, essentially, Zhang was very concerned about the Japanese because they bordered on his territory and he was more focused on fighting them. He thought they were a worse threat to China than the communists. Even though he was a member of the KMT, he still was pretty vocal with Chiang regarding his disagreements. And Chiang wanted to focus more on fighting the CCP. Zhang opposed him on this, and essentially ended up organizing a kidnapping of Chiang Kai-shek and strong-armed him into saying, okay, well, you need to stop focusing on the communists. Eventually, you need to form a united front with them against the Japanese. Of course, it was in his own self-interest, but it does show a lot of creativity on his part, having the astuteness to notice that the Japanese did pose an existential threat to China. So again, for here, you get +3 dice rolls when defending against the Japanese for the next 5 turns, and you gain 3 silver tiles that you blackmailed from Chiang Kai-shek so that he can fund essentially your combat against the Japanese. Okay, now we can go to the next slide. Okay, so the Mukden incident, this is a very important one for the Japanese. So as you know, the Japanese start in Korea and Japan. They actually did have a presence in Manchuria in real life. That was in the form of the Kwantung Army, which was essentially a kind of company army, you could think of it of. It worked with militarists in Japan, but it had a lot of independence and definitely had a lot of independence from the emperor. And its generals could essentially do what they want. And they wanted to organize war with China to try to pressure the Japanese government back home to supporting them after it was essentially a fait accompli. And this is actually what the faction player for Japan is known for helping to organize, the Mukden incident. They blew up a railroad, their own railroad, and they blamed the Northeast Army on it and attacked Zheng Zuilang. So again, to incentivize the Japanese players to actually try to invade Manchuria or to attack, you get +3 dice rolls when attacking Zheng for the next 5 turns. And then again, after that, you're drawing a new card. So those are essentially the rules that we have, and I'll give it back to Garrett to sum it up.
All right, thank you, Damien, and thank you so much for listening to our presentation of our games production thus far. We hope we interested you, the investors, in our idea of displaying through gameplay the experience of the chaos in China period, the 1930s, the Nanjing Decade in China. And to conclude with 2 points. One, a quick correction. In our 3 levels of development, villages, towns, and cities, towns yield 2 tails per turn, not 4. So quick correction there in case anybody was wondering. And finally, again, wanted to thank you so much for reading our presentation, and we highly encourage constructive feedback on not only the content of our mechanics, but also on the organization of our design. Again, thank you, and we hope you enjoy Empire's Ashes.